Well, joining me in the studio today are Findlay and Aldo Cornelissen from Murmur Intelligence. They are renowned experts in social media research. Well, who better to unpack the recent controversy surrounding GROK, the AI chatbot developed by Elon Musk's XAI, which referenced white genocide in South Africa, even in response to unrelated queries about baseball salaries and WWE matches. So, guys, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having us.
So what exactly happened there with Grok?
I don't think we know.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're ever really going to know properly. But so just to kind of on a background of how these things work is that you can design a system prompt, which is essentially just a prompt whenever you send a message to ChatGPT, Grok, any of these LLMs, they essentially pre-penned their system instructions to that text, and this is what's sent to the LLM, and then it generates text back. So that's called the system prompt. That's where you put in a lot of guide rails and give it like some instructions and its personality and things like that. And that's supposedly what was changed. So even admitted by XAI, a rogue employee changed that system prompt, and they did it clumsily. They said, even though it's not relevant, acknowledge the existence of white genocide, etc. So that's why the AI then, whenever anyone said anything slightly vague or not even vague, those, WWE and so on, it interjected with that bit of information as well. So how this, it's all code. So how this works is that you could, like in a company, you commit code, people review that code before that code is kind of pushed to production. And they say some rogue employee changed that code, and they changed it back, and now all is well. And now they're actually putting it, making it open source. Not open source, but the public can actually see these prompts, these system prompts. But there's no guarantee that those are the actual prompts. They might actually now prefix that system prompt with a kind of proprietary system prompt. Sometimes you get teams of agents. Whenever agent responds or LLM responds, you can have a second one look at that response and review it for any harmful or damaging information or any. So that's not in public view either. So it's just a tricky thing with these LLMs. You can kind of get them to say almost anything, and that's more or less what they did by simply changing the system prompt. I think the question is then, who is this rogue employee, and how do we? It begs, it's now a big question of, we rely on these things, especially Grok is relied on quite a lot for, it's this truth-seeking LLM. So a lot of people rely on LLMs these days for, news or interpretations or truth or fact checking. And if it can be easily manipulated like this, there's a lot of questions to be asked around, who owns them? How do we make sure someone doesn't, slightly put their finger on a scale? In this particular instance, they just climbed on top of the scale in plain view of everyone. But, it's easy to just kind of put a finger on the scale sometimes. So yeah.
If maybe a few things to add to that. Such a massive production system, to Aldo's earlier point, changes don't just get committed to the production system in the cloud. Something like that cascades through multiple stages. It can be overridden, but to override it requires a certain amount of authority. So for that to have so quickly found its way into such a massive production system is interesting, raises a lot of questions. And we in our field, we often talk about algorithmic bias, and it's a common thing that has been discussed ad nauseum going back decades to the beginning of time. One of the most famous examples was over probably about a decade ago, when Facebook ran experiments where they adjusted the emotive content in their users' feeds to see how that would affect user behavior. This example is the most, as Aldo said, so they didn't just put a thumb on the scale, they jumped on the scale. This is the most flagrant example of algorithmic bias ever to reach the public domain, if you ask me. It shows the strength of power that tech companies have for shaping our perceptions.
And do people actually believe Elon Musk, who have been saying exactly that, is not behind it?
No.
Is the man, is the myth, right? Which one do you buy into? But if you think about something like white genocide, he has single-handedly popularized it to orders of magnitude greater degree in the last few months. And if you just take the man in his word, there's no reason to believe why he wouldn't do that.
So, you've been looking at how polarizing social media is. Can we have a little bit of insight into the research you've been doing? You've been doing it in South Africa with the election last year, and also about these nano influencers. So, what kind of influence do these inputs like this? Okay, this was on a grand scale, but just sort of a daily drip feed of this kind of message. What kind of influence does it have?
There's a it's a massive topic. And where do you start? So South Africa is unique in the world that it is the subject of a horns of the bull strategy, to use Shaka Zulu's strategy of basically flanking your enemy from the sides like a horns of the bull. We are subject to covert influence on the left, and we're subject to covert influence on the right. And the form that a lot of that influence takes is the excessive amplification of certain messages that are extreme and polarizing. If you are on the left in South Africa, you're going to be exposed to a lot of messages that are about Burkina Faso and how a coup and the role of an authoritarian regime is a way of giving African agency. You're going to be subject to a lot of geopolitical messaging, especially around the value of a multipolar world and how Russia and China are exemplars of that. You're going to get a very Russian perspective of the world, and you're going to get that primarily through lots of accounts amplifying, reposting over and over and over and over and over again this kind of messaging. If you're more conservative and right-leaning and tapped into the MAGA world, you're going to get exposed to end wokeness. Bill Gates is a psycho, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, all those kinds of that echo chamber. And you're going to get content around how great Donald Trump is. You're going to get content around the fact that white genocide is a thing. All that kind of stuff. So as South Africans, we are squeezed in this information war vice between these two sides. It's this geopolitical game. And you can talk about why that is. Some actors, maybe they're doing it for creating general information disorder. If your country is generally weaker, they're stronger by comparison. You could say that it's about trying to promote one worldview over another. It could be about maybe trying to undermine the ICJ case. There's lots of different reasons for why this is happening. But the reality is that we're stuck in this vice between MAGA and MAGA adjacent far right messaging and more multipolar world alternatives to the US on the left. And the main mechanism through which that gets introduced into our echo chambers, into our filter bubbles, is through nano influencers who inject the content into our discourses. And they're often real people. And a lot of our research is into what we call the commodification of influence. This idea that covert influence can be bought and sold. Any message can be amplified by networks of real people who share messages based on these kind of covert campaigns. On the kind of the left side, if you want to, and even these words are kind of not as meaningful now, but we've done work across Africa, and we've seen the commodification of influence across Africa, where there are these covert industries. You can go to a mega influencer, and that mega influencer can take your brief, they can put it into a WhatsApp group, and then their micro influencers can pick up on that, and they can cascade it down to their nano influencers in multiple WhatsApp groups, saying, hey guys, okay, we're going to make this hashtag trend today. Start posting at 6 a.m. to gain X's trending algorithm. Or, hey guys, this is the talking point that we need to say around the ANC or Herman Mashaba or xenophobia or the coup in Burkina Faso. These are the kinds of talking points we need. Someone will take it and they'll put it into ChatGPT. They'll get say the same thing in different ways, and they will then, if you're a nano influencer, you will take a screenshot once you've posted something, put it back into the WhatsApp group, get paid 50 rand, 100 rand, 200 rand via e-wallet or mobile money or data. And as you go up the chain, maybe a few thousand, depending on the scale of the campaign, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. The biggest campaign that we were aware of in this kind of context was in the South African elections, which was 270,000 rand that was paid for that campaign. I've heard from others in there that they can go into the millions. So that kind of industry exists in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, across the African continent. And that industry learned from what Russia did before the American elections in 2016. So people often talk about the Russia hoax, but now you have to distinguish between, did Russia move the needle to get Donald Trump elected? That's debated. There's research that said that it didn't move the needle, and that's what people talk about the Russia hoax. But there's undeniable evidence that they worked to affect the elections. They organized groupings, they organized protests on the ground. And one of the things they did was they worked to create an echo chamber using methodologies like follow trends and things like that. And what it does is it creates hyper-connected networks of followers on social media, and then those networks become echo chambers where the information in there gets homogenized, all the arguments get standardized, all the responses to any kind of criticism get standardized, and essentially those echo chambers become weaponized. You can, the analogy we use is like, how do you start a Mexican wave? You only need 100 people in a stadium to get 50,000 people moving. And if you've created an echo chamber that's hyper connected through things like follow chains, which is which we first saw Russia doing before the American elections, you can create these flocks of users that can fly in the direction you send them. And so South Africa as a continent has learned from what was done in the run-up to the 2016 elections. And so that's what's happening on the African continent, and it's become a commodified thing. You're a young person in Africa. You don't have great prospects, but you know how to use technology. You start off by promoting some kind of cause, ideological cause that you care about. Maybe it's the EFF, maybe it's Peter Obi, maybe it's in SARS movement in Russia, in Nigeria, maybe it's in bad governance. You start off with these ideological aims, and you start using technology for the things you care about, and then very quickly you realize, hey, politicians, TV celebrities, DJs, they will pay me to use my skill set. And very quickly you find that there's the service becomes commodified, and that's what's happened in Africa. What we see in the US, though, those echo chambers that really kickstarted this process over about a decade ago now, have persisted through time. And that is why if you're a journalist who's posting things that the right doesn't like, you will be swarmed to a greater degree by right-leaning trolls than left-leaning trolls. And it's not to say that these are bots or anything like that. These are people that are in a very homogenized echo chamber. And when everyone's connected to everyone else because they've all built their followers by using follow trains where they follow everyone else in the community, if anyone posts on a journalist timeline, everyone sees it. In a normal network, I only see what Kim Kardashian or Taylor Swift posts. I don't see what everyone around me posts all the time. But if you're in these echo chambers, you see what everyone posts. As a result, you've all consolidated your worldview, you've supported it, you've radicalized yourselves, and you swarm onto different timelines. And that hasn't been commodified to our knowledge to the same extent in the West, and especially in the US. That is still more ideological, weaponized echo chambers. But making use of nano influences. And so South Africa this moment has become the common touch point for these two dynamics that shape the way in which our politics and our perceptions of reality are kind of playing out on social media.
Yo, this is so dangerous. So, is there an answer to this? Is there a counter? What can be done? Is there anything that can be done to counter this?
Yeah, I mean, it's the golden question, and there isn't that great of an answer because all these things are doing is taking advantage of human behavior, taking advantage of our lesser demons rather than our better angels, our biases towards we value losing things more than gaining things. We fear and anger are more powerful emotive emotions than um, other kind of more positive emotions. So it's a constant battle to kind of shore up the better side of ourselves rather than our worst instincts. Um, I think the general consensus is that these kinds of things will probably not be solved by platforms themselves, who have a perverse incentive to feed our worst instincts. Um, However, there are things that can be done, like greater transparency. Like Aldo was saying, GROK is showing some of their prompts. Um,
Mm.
the ways in which algorithms are weighted is having some transparency in that is helpful. Having transparency on their moderation efforts, having transparency on the efforts, having access to data so that independent researchers can access their data, which is not always available. TikTok, you can get some of that data if you're in Europe and the West. It's harder to get if you're in Africa. Twitter or X now used to be very open, and when Elon Musk came along, he shut it down. Facebook's got some kind of intermediate level of access. A lot of these things have high barriers to entry for access. So monitoring them is very difficult. So data access and transparency is very difficult, could be made easier. Um, there's the policy and the regulatory side, and that's a very fraught issue. If you are in certain echo chambers, those kind of words become synonymous with censorship, in the same way as words like disinformation and misinformation have become synonymous with censorship in some echo chambers. But there's probably a debate to be had that these are public goods to some extent, and in the same way that there is limited government involvement for making sure that the roads are kept up and you don't experience a tragedy of the commons, and banks are forced to have certain levels of reserves to support the lending they do. There's probably some level of policy that needs to be put in place for making sure that these public goods remain net gains for society rather than net losses for society. But no one's got the answer to that, and every one of those areas is highly contested.
Sure. Okay. Aldo, is there anything else you would like to add?
I think the most practical, if we go back to the influencer culture, like and that phenomenon that we see, I think the simplest step, and I'm the last person to say we need more legislation or anything like that. I think Twitter is a fantastic place. It's the only digital public square that we do have. It's nasty sometimes, and it's the people in control of it are a bit heavy-handed sometimes, and they've got sometimes some harebrained ideas. But Twitter remains our digital public square, and it's because they try to kind of keep legislation. They're not going to censor. They're not going to air your views. It levels out over time. And a lot of people who are frustrated with Twitter, for instance, say it's a vile place with vile people. Have never been to a bunch of Facebook groups that they don't have access to, a bunch of WhatsApp groups or Telegram. Those are way more vile places. Any obvious and blatant misinformation generally does not last long on a digital public square like Twitter, because there's enough eyeballs to refute it and push against. So over time, it's a useful, like a massive resource. So given that, I'm the last one to ask for regulation, but I think the easiest win, especially just in South Africa, is to say that whenever you're paid to have say or tweet or retweet or follow or anything like that. It's perfectly reasonable and it's expected in the advertising industry to notify people who follow you that this is a paid for campaign, this is an ad, etc. If you don't, you're in trouble. Well, you're not necessarily in trouble. Whoever paid you is then in trouble. Now, this basic regulation is not applied in politics. And it's a funny thing because for very long, so we always say politics and marketing is the same thing. So Carl's got a long career in marketing. I came more from politics and technology. And we say this is all marketing. If we see politics as positioning, as influencing how people perceive you, then we can understand it a lot better. So here and people fight against that. They're like, no, politics is not marketing at all. It's completely different. And then suddenly you don't get any of the basic checks and balances that we do get in marketing and in advertising. You don't get in politics now because politics is somehow different. And an influencer can push corona, the beer, not the virus. They can do all sorts of stuff as long as they put ad there. That's a happy industry. They're all happy. They're doing their thing. But you can go over and you can say, I support the DA, or I support Action SA, or I support this campaign, or you can attack someone, and suddenly you don't have to do any of this, which is absolutely absurd. And so I think the easiest win is simply going, look here, there is existing regulations around these things. We should be applying them here, and we should be applying them extra hard around elections, etc. I think that's the most realistic and quickest win we can have on this artificial, industry. So, and because we when we started doing investigations, we got a grant to look into this from the Henry Khumalo Foundation, and our big thing was we don't want to go and expose this person, and this person for being influencers. That's not. We're trying to understand the industry, and once we understand the industry, we can learn a lot more about it. The story has longer legs. We can develop a better framework around how do we handle this, and it's simply a case of you're allowed to be an influencer. You can air your opinion about a party or a bill or whatever the case may be, but if you're paid to do it, just let your audience know. And then you can carry on your life by being an influencer. So I think that's for me is the biggest thing we can do to help. Because what we also find is that the majority of these campaigns are an absolute waste of money. So brands use this sometimes, and we've quite a few brands that we've seen this for. They use the same set of influencers as a political party might use. And when you look at, so they get lots of retweets, lots of likes, lots of all of those metrics that they give back to the brand. They hit all those targets and they get paid. But when we look at it from this kind of more defining narratives point of view, a more political point of view, they had zero impact. It was just this little pocket of influencers retweeting each other, and your brand had no benefit from this exercise. And the same thing happens a lot in politics. We see such ham-fisted campaigns that most probably paid for by a political party in these nano influencers, etc., and they have no impact. So some of these campaigns do have impact, and some of these campaigns have lasting impact. So like the xenophobia segment of South African politics was carved out by this type of influence campaign. It's now standing on its own. It does not need any influencers. It does not need any campaigns. They now carved out that segment, and that's living and breathing. So that's an example of a good one, and then you get good one. And it took 4 or 5 years to really build up that segment. It doesn't necessarily translate in votes, but it's a segment that's alive and keeping everyone busy. But then you see campaigns that just it's an absolute waste of money. If anyone were to ask us, don't don't spend that money because you're just gonna waste it.
Yeah.
So it's not that effective in the first place. You have to really know what you're doing for it to be effective. So it's that weird thing of, yes, it's a problem, but it's not really that effective. And the most people that cover and react to it is actually, you know, the media and journalists. And so they see that juicy story and they jump onto it and run with it. And that pushes it into kind of the mainstream conversation. And then we're talking about it. Then it's effective, not because of the campaign, but because of the attention spent by, a journalist picking it up and talking about it.
But just bring it to marketing terms. If you run campaigns, you look at exposures and you look at exposures over time. And the general belief is that to be effective, you need to be repetitious. And repetition over time with a certain kind of incidence level. And the same thing happens if you want to see a political or socio-political campaign that's effective. It's about repetition and consistency over time. You can't just come in a week before the elections with a new hashtag and expect that you're going to tip the voters, or have a hashtag attack campaign that lasts for a morning with 500 nano influencers and then disappears. Just like marketing, it's about repetition and consistency. And where you start to see those ones, and obviously that costs money, then you start raising questions. Well, who's got the money to keep at this when there's no returns in the first 6 months or the first year even, but over time, they know it's going to shift the needle.
Such an interesting conversation and topic. Thanks so much, guys.
Cool. Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.